Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast. We are chatting about culture today and how culture impacts the folks we bring in and the folks that leave. And I don't know about you, but there's times where I walk into an organization and I'm like, nope, let's turn around and leave. Or I'm like, oh my gosh, like we're going to have a party and we're going to get so much stuff done. And we are going to have a party today. And I have Zech Dahms with me. And Zech is the founder and culture strategist at Perennial Culture. And he's also the leader of the HR and people leader community at Achieve Engagement. So Zech, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tracy. So excited to be here.
Yeah. All right. So how do we throw parties based on culture?
That's a great question. Well, one of the best ways to throw a party around culture or with any team is to co-create it with the people involved. So if anything, pull them into the room with you and start there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the best part about that is we don't create our organizations and our teams in a vacuum, right? And this is not a party of one, right? It's all right. Who do we want to attract? What does that look like? Then how do we bring that together to do it together? And my idea is not always the best idea either.
Yeah, and sometimes that's a whole perception or paradigm change that needs to come within the organization. I think a lot of HR leaders and people leaders can relate where they're often seen as like the holders of the culture. They're going to for all the solutions that they need to provide to solve all these employee experience and engagement challenges. Yet it's not just the HR leader's role. It's kind of everyone's a part of that experience. So it truly needs to be a collective effort and experience when you're going through with these initiatives.
Absolutely. So when you look at the leader's role in culture and kind of driving cultural change, what is it? What's the magic wand, sprinklings that we're doing here?
Yeah. Well, it really does come from the top in a lot of these things where the culture is often just a reflection of the leader themselves. So if you're trying to really evolve your culture, if you need to change your culture, it's just as much as a personal journey as it is a collective journey. So thinking about the changes that need to happen within yourself, that's almost a question that every leader should be asking themselves if they're going to begin some type of culture change initiative. So looking at the top suite of the organization, understanding how they behave and see things within the world. And if they're trying to develop a certain culture in a certain way, are they reflecting that reality themselves in their own lives? So that's really kind of where the personal journey begins.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reflection, I think, is really important. And I know something you've talked about is how does EQ play a role? And, we've not talked about EQ on this podcast yet. So what is EQ and why is it important?
Yeah. So EQ or emotional intelligence is really our own ability to understand and use and manage our own emotions in different ways, whether that's with stress and conflict or communicating effectively or empathizing with others. It's also our ability to understand and relate to other people's emotions. It's all those kind of like interpersonal elements within a company. So after you get through all the systems and operational stuff that we typically focus on within our companies, you're left with this piece. And this is often where a lot of our biggest challenges come from. And a lot of organizations maybe delay conversations around it because it's a little uncomfortable, right? Talking and focusing on our own emotions and how they relate to how we work together. And we often try to shove that out of the workplace, but it's impossible to shove out of the workplace. We're just humans. We're people. So I found that it is really the secret to, especially from a leadership standpoint, fostering a very productive culture and having more effective decision making, and having even better influence within your people.
Yeah, absolutely. What that reminds me of, and so I'm going to go on a tangent here for a hot second and then we can come back, but it reminds me of the 5 languages of appreciation at work, right? So it's not, I mean, yes, it is the feeling side of it, but it's like, hey, how do I need to connect with folks that is going to, ensure that they have what they need so that those kind of hot button feelings that are natural based on how we're built don't kind of flare up.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we just did a whole session on feedback with an organization, right? Feedback is such like a huge topic that we've been trying to figure out within companies forever. And we have yet to really strive in this area. And I think some organizations are really good at it. Most are still trying to figure out, how do we even facilitate these conversations? How do we actually do it on a consistent basis? And yeah, this emotional intelligence piece is such a core element of our ability to not only give feedback, but receive it as well. So, do we understand how people react to tension or conflict? And how do I react when I'm receiving it and not get defensive and angry, like frustrated with certain parts of the feedback, when usually it's a piece of gift, it's a valuable piece of information, but it's not easy to always have that viewpoint on it, especially if we're having issues in certain parts of emotional intelligence, like our self-perception and our way we express our emotions and how we manage stress and some of those things too. So yeah, it's so important within how we are able to communicate with each other.
So I'm going to kind of just bring in a story here. Not kind of, I'm going to, and it's like when we look at these, you're saying, hey, what's my self-perception? That thought that you have about yourself is going to drive everything else. So for example, I had a conversation with one of our team members yesterday, and we were talking just about goals and goal alignment and whatnot, and nothing was right or wrong, right? But I was terrified of that conversation. And I couldn't really pinpoint why. And we're going through it. And she's getting so excited. She's like, oh my gosh. She's like, Tracy, I know what winning looks like now. And I didn't before because I didn't have the metrics and the dashboard in front of me. And now I do. And I'm so excited. I'm sitting here like dreading this conversation, thinking that it's going to be like this huge accountability conversation that's going to be negative. She's like, this is the best conversation we've had in like months. I'm like, wow. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And that perception going in of, oh my gosh, this is going to be a horrible conversation, or I'm very apprehensive about it, versus flipping it to say, hey, this is a really great opportunity that we can lay out together what winning looks like. So we both know what it is. And we both have really clear, our metrics are much clearer than what they may have been in the past.
Yeah, and I would have to bet that you probably have a strong foundation of trust between each other as well. And
very much so. Yeah,
that's also like a key element that's needed to have that type of mindset, where if my relationship with my leader or one of my peers isn't built from a foundation of trust, and maybe there's a little bit of a competitive nature here or certain elements of fear where I'm not sure what's next for me based on how my performance is going, I'm going into that conversation with my, shield up and ready, right? So how do you actually build a culture that's on a foundation of trust and connection and support, where when someone's coming to you with feedback, especially if it's critical feedback, it's coming from a place of love and appreciation and support, and they're trying to support your growth and ability to thrive in whatever role or future you have within the company, versus, hey, your reputation is online and I'm worried about the future. And if I mess up, or if anyone finds out how I'm messing up, how is that going to impact my capability to stay here or not? So, and that's like the reality for a lot of people in their roles today, unfortunately. So how do we build trust? And then how do you start to build that perception around feedback that it's a valuable thing and it's something we should do all the time and engage with it and really embrace it?
Yeah. And I think when we look at trust, this goes back to culture, but it's also what are the foundations of what that's going to look like? And that starts before day one, right? Like that starts in the interview process. That starts with the conversations. That starts all the way back, but it is your behaviors over and over. Like, can I trust if they have a deadline that they're going to follow through on it? Can I trust if they say they're going to do something that they are? Can I trust if I bring something to them, they're going to hold it and they're not going to share that with others. Like Brene Brown's when she talks about the vault, right? Like, I think that there's so many things here with trust that go into that. And when that's there, then we can have those other conversations, and, going back to the emotional intelligence, what is our thought about ourselves first before it's others? Otherwise it gets projected out.
Yeah, very important, right? We have to understand our own limiting beliefs or our own kind of paradigms of the world, and how does that get impacted when other people interact with it, right? Like, why do I get triggered this certain way when certain statements or things are brought up? And why do I get maybe triggered in certain situations when people behave a certain way? So how do you build that trust and understand not only your own story that you're telling yourself, but your peers' stories? And I can actually share like a pretty interesting story pretty quick here, where there's this like new executive team that we were working with. Most of them haven't been working together for less than 6 months. So you got to think like at the highest level, this is a new team that's expected to perform extremely well to keep the organization rowing in the same direction. Yet they haven't really built that foundation of trust yet, which was causing a lot of issues, to the point where the CFO was really new. He was known as being this really, really big stickler on the budget, right? They're growing. And a lot of the other departments was like, how can I expand my practice if the CFO is not allowing me to invest in new things, right? They're so tight on the budget. We're bringing more money in. Why can't I do this? And they're almost getting frustrated with the fact that the CFO was tight on the budget. So we had this, strategic retreat. A lot of it was focused on understanding our own stories and narratives and building a deeper level of trust with each other. And we quickly learned that the CFO grew up in a very hostile environment where, they didn't always have extra money to spend. We're struggling to pay bills in his childhood and often moving place to place because they couldn't afford the last place. So when you really get to understand that story and build that trust with each other of like where you're coming from and why do you think the way that you think, now I have a better understanding of how to communicate with you. It's like, okay, I get it why you're kind of a little stricter on the budget. And you know what? That's probably a good role for the CFO to have to begin with. And now when I go to you with different things that I want to invest in, I can come from it with some empathy and understanding of why you see things the way you see things today. They've been killing it since then, but without that foundation of trust and connection, you're not really effectively able to have those conversations in the future.
Right. I think what's so important there is, our biggest pain points in our life so often become our biggest strengths.
Yeah. It ends up kind of being a gift in the future. Usually there's maybe a shadow that oversees it at some point, but the goal is like, wow, you know what? This is actually one of my shining values that help me be my best self in today's world.
Right. And not going too much into self-help and whatnot, but you just brought up we coach, we do a ton of coaching, and I know you do too. And like that shadow work is so important, is when you've got the trust and are able to bring out that shadow, all it needs to be done most of the time is brought into the light and shown, hey, this is okay. Right. Like, that story you just shared was very simple, but yet very compounded in, if he wasn't willing to share that, all he did was take the shadow that he labeled as bad and got the acceptance from the group. Now that's his strength, right? It's like I had a fear of bringing something forward because I'm like, oh my gosh, is she going to be upset? Is she going to leave? Is she going to do whatever? And she's like, oh my gosh, you just gave me exactly what I needed, which is I needed to know what winning looked like. And I needed to know where to find the metrics. And you gave me all that. Like, it's simple, right? And so often I think that we're so afraid of the thing is because we're afraid of bringing it in the light when it's really not a big deal. Once we can say, all right, what's the worst that can happen? I feel stupid about it. All right, let's just feel stupid for a second.
There's a good chance you're going to feel stupid about it at the very beginning either way, just because you truly are going outside your comfort zone and you're pushing the boundaries of kind of your little safety box that you're working within. So those first kind of maybe couple times, like exposing those things, it's definitely going to feel uncomfortable. You're definitely going to feel a little out of control, right? Like we always have this like need for a sense of control, and this is like an element of releasing that. So that's not going to feel the best to you, but overall that muscle starts to be built. And then not only do you become more empowered to work through it, but now others are aware of it and they can also support you in your journey too.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of a win-win by taking action on these things.
Yeah. And I think something else that's important is the flip side of this is no one else is responsible for your triggers, right? You're 100% responsible for your triggers, and it is your job to figure out how to have them not trigger you or how to work them in a way that doesn't have a negative impact on others and your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, back to the emotional intelligence piece, a huge part of that is stress management, right? Like, how do we have a tolerance for stress? How do we be flexible within our work environment and not triggers or emotions kind of keep us constricted into a way we respond, but actually embracing those things and remaining flexible with how we kind of maneuver through certain situations and even stay optimistic, right? Where there's always going to be challenges out there. There's always things that we can look forward to kind of make things look like the world's on fire or our organization's crumbling. But how do you stay in more of a productive, progressive mindset and an optimistic mindset of how do we solve these issues, pull the organization and be more defined by a vision of the future versus experiences of the past?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so often, what I find is, all right, we've got the vision. So what does the vision actually mean in actuality, right? Like, what are those business outcomes we're looking for? And how do we get there? And not always in the touchy-feely, but also, yes, we need to look at revenue. We need to look at all these other things. And there's ways that we can get there that allow every individual to feel fulfilled in the work that they're doing while also meeting the business outcomes. And that's where the fun and the dance comes in. We said we were going to throw a party today. So I had to bring it back around.
Yeah. No, we're definitely having a party around something soon on this.
Yes, for sure. So, when we create this environment, so you've got the vision of the culture that you're creating and how you're thriving to do that. How do you design it?
That's a great question, right? And I think that's like the biggest gap in a lot of people's strategies, especially in the world of culture. It's easy to have our vision planning sessions. It's easy to put values on a board somewhere and start to brainstorm these things. But how do you actually turn it into a reality, right? So part of that is actually fostering and creating an environment around you that reinforces this reality. I always like to say, first, like, our mindsets design our environment, and then our environment reinforces our mindset. So you kind of can take two different approaches at the same time to impact your culture. One of them is the EQ piece, right? Working internally in yourself and your own individual journey. But the other piece is the environment. So what we look at is different parts of even social relationships and the interpersonal pieces of how people work together, and how do you foster different ways that people have different dialogues with each other, how people collaborate, how people make decisions with each other, how people come together and even meet on an ongoing basis. Then you go to things like spaces. Even this was a lot more controllable when we were very much in like an office environment. You think about how much money people used to invest, and still do, in office spaces, because the space around you, the physical elements of your life, has such an influence in how you think and behave every single day. So how do you actually, like, I'm talking the tangible stuff, create an environment, a physical environment and space around you that reinforces certain types of behaviors and thinking, and that will reinforce the type of culture you're trying to envision. So you kind of have to connect that. And then the last one, especially with systems or environment systems. So things as simple as performance management and performance enablement, and the systems you use to set goals and objectives, to decision-making processes, to even org structure and how information flows through the company, or routines and rituals, right? That's a huge one. Like, what are our daily and weekly rituals that we do to reinforce certain behaviors? And if we want to behave a certain way, do our rituals and systems actually reflect that? Or are we just kind of like, well, yeah, we want to be more innovative, we want to be more collaborative, but we're not actually prioritizing rituals that reinforce collaborative behaviors, right? And design sprints and innovation sessions and brainstorming. If we're not doing those things, it doesn't really reinforce an innovative or collaborative culture. And that's just an example, but those are the type of things you need to foster to kind of create this environment that reinforces the type of culture you envision.
Yeah, absolutely. Or the line of, well, we've already always done it that way, or that won't work.
Yeah.
Or like, those quick comments that are like, we just shut it all down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And specific to that, there has to be some type of tension for change. So
Right.
I always try to think of like your creative culture or creative tension or a culture of tension that you're comfortable with.
Yep.
You think of a rubber band, right? Like you can stretch it really far and the rubber band snaps, but if you don't stretch it at all, you have this like flimsy, useless piece of rubber. So what level of tension are you comfortable with that at least pulls you forward into the future, but not to the point where it snaps?
Right.
So yes, we've been doing it this way, but without tension, we don't grow. We aren't pulled into the future. Right. So you kind of have to think about what level you're most comfortable with. It has to be there. If you are feeling uncomfortable, that's a good sign that culture change is happening, right? So embrace that.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, so I'm going to bring this back to a party theme in just a second, but we would always joke on our team and say, are we stretchy right now? Or are we stressy?
Yeah.
Right. Like stretchy. Are we pulling it so that we're uncomfortable to move forward? Are we past that point where we're getting to the point of stressy? Right. Yeah. So, and then the other is, as you were saying this, all I was thinking about is like the t-shirt bomb thing where you pull it and it sees how far that t-shirt can lob out there, right? Like you need that tension so that we can go further as a team. So as we start to land this plain t-shirt, whatever we're doing here in our little culture party, what's a key takeaway that you have for executives listening in today?
Yeah, I would say for every key executive listening into, I'm assuming if you're listening to this podcast, you probably care about the work environment you're building. You probably want to build a better world of work. And for the people that are working within your organization, rather than trying to make this such like a key, huge change initiative that's only on your shoulders or the HR leader's shoulders, bring your people into the room, co-create the experiences with them. Don't try to think you have to come with all the answers. It's a collective effort. So try to evolve and make this a co-creative experience. And then as you're learning kind of that direction, I would say focus more internally on yourself. Like, how do you be a servant leader? How do you role model the way? What does that behavior look like within your role? Because at the end of the day, your company's culture is just as much as a mirror of yourself. So if you're looking to change and develop your culture, you must change and develop yourself. And that's going to be that's the thing you can control the most as a leader. So I would highly suggest you start there.
Yep, for sure. And then what's a takeaway that you have for HR professionals that are listening in?
Well, for HR professionals, got to just build it off of that. Start with the executive team, right? And making sure they're aligned and bought into the process. I think sometimes us as HR leaders and people leaders, we're so stuck on the solutions that we're trying to create. You almost have to be just as much as a salesperson as you are a solutions expert. So selling and communicating and pulling people into the conversation, making sure they're aligned on their roles, because when you do start to implement these things, it's going to be essential that they're role modeling the way and part of the experience, because again, it's a collective thing. It's not a department's initiative and only on their shoulders. Its success really does rely on everyone participating. And then you always kind of hear about the law of diffusion and kind of like getting past a certain threshold of influence. So really kind of center in on a certain percentage of influencers that can help start creating waves around these initiatives, have them help you and be advocates in these things. And then that way, all of a sudden you reach a certain point, where things tip over and really start to snowball and you start to see these things really start to flourish.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So, Zach, thank you for being with us today and sharing some of this key knowledge on, what does culture look like, especially when we start looking at it as my personal development as a leader. And as, emotional intelligence has a huge impact in how we do this. So if you're looking to find more of Zach, we will have those links in the show notes for you. And thank you so much for joining us today. We will see you next week. Have a great week.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.